Hello, and thanks for joining, or rather tuning in to Town Meeting TV coverage of the primary election 2026. My name is Romeo von Herman. This program is part of a series of candidate forums hosted by Town Meeting TV in advance of the primary election, Tuesday, August 11, 2026. These forums are made possible by Town Meeting TV generous underwriting partners. You find all these forums at cctv.org/primary or on Town Meeting TV YouTube channel where auto-generated captions are available. If you're tuning into YouTube, please remember to subscribe and stay tuned for local democracy election this season. On tonight's program, we will hear from Amanda Janu, okay, as well as Ali Richards, and they're both running for the, I believe, Vermont Governor Democratic primary, right? And these candidates will be, or basically you're here with us, so it's not that you're joining us, so you're physically present. We have prepared a list of questions for each of you, and we'll have 90 seconds to respond to each questions. There will be also a rebuttal for each candidate if you're, of course, named directly. And that will be about 30 seconds to respond. If you're tuning live, we will welcome your questions at 802-862-3966, and we'll do our best to prioritize your questions, though we'll screen calls to ensure that questions are not repeated. We ask that you share your name, town where you live in, and the questions be directed at candidates and not just one candidate in particular. So we'll get started. For the opening statement, please tell us why you're running and what difference for your constituency you would make if you're elected. So we'll start with you, Amanda. 60 seconds, please go ahead.
Excellent. Well, good evening, everyone. I'm Amanda Janu, and I'm running for governor because I refuse to accept that collapse is inevitable or that the best a governor can do is just manage decline. I'm running because I believe that the choices we make now will determine the course of history, and I know that Vermont can not only weather the storms ahead, but lead this country forward in this moment. As authoritarian rises and inequality deepens, artificial intelligence transforms our economy and our communities are crushed by a rising cost of living. This isn't a moment for politics as usual. It's a moment that calls for courage and imagination and leadership equal to the challenges we face. I was born and raised in rural Vermont and have spent more than 15 years working as an economist, helping governments across the US and around the world to build stronger, more resilient economies. And everywhere I've worked, I've constantly come back to the same conclusion. The greatest threats we face right now is the concentration of wealth and power. That's why this campaign isn't about gaining power, it's about redistributing it. It's about assuring that every Vermonter is safe and secure in their basic needs so that we can be bold and brave in this moment and use our state power to stop the rise of authoritarianism before it's too late. Thank you.
Thank you, and Amanda, the same. Or rather, Ali, rather, the same.
Hi, folks. I'm Ali Richards, and I'm running for governor. I grew up on a dirt road in Newbury, Vermont, because my parents thought it was the best place in the world to raise a family. And you know what? They were right. But when I began my career as an organizer, I realized that the Vermont that I grew up in is really just no longer accessible. So I rolled up my sleeves and I helped lead a movement of over 40,000 Vermonters. And we passed the most significant childcare law in the country, going after a root cause of that affordability crisis. And that's when Phil Scott tried to stop us, because he vetoed that bill. You know, one of the areas of economic growth we've seen in the last 10 years. And it didn't work, because we overrode his veto with all the Dems and all the progs, a bunch of Republicans, a bunch of independents, and the only libertarian in that building. So we really had a Vermont conversation, and that's why it's working on the ground for Vermonters. So honestly, we beat Phil Scott once, and we gotta beat him again, because that affordability crisis that I was talking about, it's worse by every other measure. So we know how to organize. We know how to make a plan. We've done it before. We've got to do it again. Just imagine what we can do when we're in charge, working together to tackle Vermont's affordability crisis, housing, healthcare, a Vermont economic action plan that ties it all together. So I'm very excited to be with you tonight and excited to hear the questions from the callers.
Awesome, thank you so much for that. I believe we have a caller, so before we get to the rest of the questions, we'll start with the caller. And let's see here. Caller, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hello.
Hi, could you give us your name and the town you're calling from, and followed by the question that you have? Please direct at both candidates the question. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. My name is Charlotte Sullivan. I'm from Starksboro, Vermont, and thanks so much for taking the time to answer questions. And so my question for both of you is, in light of the recent tragedy at the hands of ICE in Maine this week, I'm wondering, as governor, what will you do to prevent this happening in Vermont, and what would you do if it happened here?
Thank you. Yep, go ahead, Allie.
Great. Thank you so much for the call. I stand with all of you in heartbreak and outrage. I mean, this is a father who lost his life in front of his daughter. Absolutely unacceptable. Enough is enough. You know, we need our governor to tell us, how many ICE agents do we have in Vermont right now? What is their mission? How do we stop this from happening again? How do we know our rights so that we don't have warrants out there that we don't know if they're real or not? You know, we don't know if this is an ICE agent or a vigilante who bought a Velcro vest or a badge on the internet. So, as governor, what I will do is fight with you and alongside of you. This is an unlawless force. They need to get out of our communities, okay? And so we have to fight together. I will stand up with the ACLU, Migrant Justice, the Vermont Asylum Assistance Project, any partner, any ally who's fighting. And we'll have a transparent communication, and we will fight alongside each other to make sure that our communities are protected and no Vermonter lives in fear. You know, this is really, there's a lot of nuance in this world, and this one is pretty clear. We cannot have ICE in our communities. It is terrorizing us, and enough is enough. I stand with all of you in this heartbreak and this outrage that I think we're all feeling today.
Thank you, and go ahead.
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for the question, Charlotte. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, I think we're living through really terrifying moments in history where, you know, we have not only witnessed ICE fatally shooting another man in Maine right after another one in Texas, but we're witnessing our president firing all of the independent election commissioners while Homeland Security is increasingly ramping up mass surveillance to target activists and citizens. And so, you know, there is no doubt that we are living through the rise of fascism, and this won't stop unless we stop it. And so, you know, for everybody, first of all, like, if you're feeling angry or frightened or just processing grief, just know that you're not alone in this moment. This is a really scary and overwhelming thing, but also it's a moment that can make us feel powerless, but it's also things that remind us of what makes Vermont so strong. The fact that, like, neighbors look out for each other, that we show up for each other, and I think that that is one of the most important things that anybody can do in this moment. Make sure that you keep looking out for one another in your communities. Don't succumb to the hatred and division. But it's also a moment where we need states to stand up, because when our federal institutions are failing to protect democracy, that is a moment when we need states to take a lead. And so I would really propose joining and leading a multi-state coalition to not only make sure we're protecting constitutional rights, but recognizing that this authoritarianism has emerged because of an economic concentration of power as well. And so this is a moment where we need to be strategically pooling resources, divesting joint pensions, for example, and also ensuring the level of supply chain resiliency that we need to make sure that every Vermonter is safe and secure, so we can be bold and brave and stand up in this moment.
Okay, thank you for that. We have another caller. Let's see. All right, caller, go ahead. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Hi, this is Jake in Burlington, and my question is whether you guys could share what you've done over the course of your career to improve the lives of Vermonters.
Of
Lives of Vermonters.
Of Vermonters.
Thank you. And we'll go ahead. Amanda, you can get started. We'll go to Allie.
Sure. Sure. So maybe just by way of, like, explaining quickly a little bit about my background. So I have spent my career working on economic policy, so really dedicated, I would say, to challenging increasing consolidations of like wealth and power and corporate corruption that happens within democracies. And so a lot of that is around how do you use the power of fiscal policy to support local businesses, generate good jobs, and diversify local economies. And some of that work ultimately ended up looking like, how do we work to reform our actual definitions of progress as a society so that they move away from just centering, GDP growth or stock market values to center social and ecological well-being, so that that can become a North Star to guide investment and budgets. And that work helped to inform the co-founding of the Wellbeing Economy Alliance of Vermont, which has been a coalition of the Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, Vermont Sustainable Jobs Fund, the Vermont Council for Rural Development, Abundant Sun, Vermont Humanities Council, as well as the Gund Institute at UVM. So really bringing together business, civil society, rural economic development, academia, and equity stakeholders to really think about how do we proactively understand what it means to live a good life and to advance really transformative economic strategies and policies here in the state, as well as engaging in advocacy, both in terms of proactive advocacy with Rights and Democracy. I was the chairman of their board, and also being part of the ACLU of Vermont for more defense in this moment, and really proud of all the incredible work that they've been doing, particularly in this moment with ICE.
Okay. Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for the question, Jake. I basically have spent almost my entire life on the ground in Vermont, working shoulder to shoulder with Vermonters. Governor Dean appointed me to the State Board of Education when I was 15 years old, and I worked in the governor's office, the last Democratic governor, and I was in the middle of the recovery from Tropical Storm Irene, helping folks rebuild. I actually did an array of projects for the governor. I was sort of the catch-all for all policies, so ag work, expanding dual enrollment in early college, explaining school lunch and breakfast programs, and chipping away at our affordability crisis at every possible turn, including passing universal pre-K, first in the country. And then locally, when Montpelier flooded our state capital, and we pretty much lost our capital to the flood in 2023, I was mucking out with my neighbors and became the co-chair of the Commission on Resiliency and Recovery, because I could not live in a world where I knew my town was going to get devastated year after year after year. We did some really innovative things there. But what I really want to say is childcare. We transformed the childcare system of the state of Vermont, and is now a model for states across the country, for cities, for municipalities, and it's working. It's real cost savings for 5,000 plus Vermont families, and created over 100 new childcare businesses, over 2,000 new spaces. And it's raising wages for early childhood educators who now can make a living doing this most important career. So I've really been on the ground with Vermonters almost my entire professional career, and I'm excited to do it from the governor's office.
All right, thank you so much. It looks like we have another caller, and a bunch of calls coming in today. So. Hi, caller, can you hear us?
Hi, yes.
Could you give us your name and the town you're calling from, and go ahead with your question thereafter?
My name is Ari. I'm from Essex, and my question for the candidates is, Phil Scott often blames the legislature for the problems facing Vermont, and I wanted to ask if the candidates could share some of the bright spots or the positive things they've seen from the legislature during the Scott administration.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're going to start with Ali. Go ahead, Ali.
Great question, Ari. Thanks so much for calling in. So yeah, when you're blaming, you're not leading. And the governor has pretty much gotten away with blaming the legislature for everything that's wrong. I really appreciate the question, because there's some really great things that came out of the legislature. First, the most significant child care bill in the country, which is really changing lives, and that showed a lot of political courage. They passed a data center bill, which was going to protect communities, and the governor vetoed that. It was a really good bill. They passed reference-based pricing, which was going to control healthcare costs and bring down millions of dollars of costs in property taxes and healthcare, and the governor vetoed that. Those are very good bills the legislature worked on and passed that we should have seen signed into law. the legislature passed pension reform. This was going to tank us as an economy, and they came together across party lines and compromised to pass pension reform, and the governor vetoed that, and they overrode his veto with unanimous support, everyone in that building. And I have to say, I'm so grateful for that work by the legislature, because that's one of the many systemic crises I will not have to deal with when I'm governor, because that was really a true economic challenge that this legislature came together and solved. You know, there's actually quite a few really wonderful things that the legislature has been able to pass and work on, with, you know, just a couple of those as examples. And sadly, many of those examples are ones the governor vetoed. Luckily, they were able to override both the child care veto as well as that, you know, the pension reform veto.
Thank you. And Amanda, go ahead.
Sure. Well, thank you for that question, Ari. I think that there's honestly so many incredible examples of really leading bills that have come through the legislature, really creative solutions to crises that we've been facing. I mean, some of my favorite ones, I would say, that make me really proud to live in Vermont was, for example, the bill that we passed that would hold oil and gas companies accountable for the costs of climate change. We're the first state to do that. We're still going through the litigation, but that's really amazing, you know? We're really setting a standard there. We passed incredible, you know, leading data privacy bill, which, you know, similarly, Phil Scott did veto that one. But we have, I think, as well, focused a lot on how do we keep Vermont thriving in a lot of ways here. And so whether that's related to ensuring greater protections for our vulnerable populations in Vermont, this year we've seen a lot of leadership around ensuring that our immigrant neighbors are protected, that their rights are protected in this moment, and that all Vermonters are going to make sure that they're safe and secure in the years that are coming ahead.
Thank you, Amanda. It looks like we have another call coming in, so let's go ahead and take that. Caller, can you hear us?
Hello?
Can you hear us?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Please give us your name and the town you're calling from, and then go ahead with your question. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah.
You want that now?
Yeah. Go ahead with your name, the town you're calling from, and with your question, please.
Hi, this is Evelyn calling from Bennington. And the candidates have said some things about their career. I'm wondering if you could pick out one thing that you are most proud of in your accomplishments.
Thank you. Amanda, go ahead, please.
My goodness. Choosing the thing that I'm most proud of as an accomplishment. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me actually was, this was years ago, but I was asked to speak at this World Water Conference when I was quite a bit younger. So I was on like a young person's panel and was all nervous and just wanted to make sure I said something that sounded remotely intelligent enough to be worthy of being at this giant conference. And I showed up at the conference and I saw that Nestle was a sponsor, and I was like, I don't know a lot about water, but I do know that Nestle is not a friend of clean water access in the world. And so I went back and I really sat with this. And so when I was sitting there and they asked around what environmental or economic policy I thought would be most powerful for clean water access, I decided to call on a global binding code of conduct for multinational corporations. And I talked about the investor-state dispute settlement system and how corporations can actually sue governments and citizens and taxpayers for the right to advance labor regulations or environmental standards that they view as infringing on future profits. And I ended up getting a bunch of applause, and then I ended up getting in a ton of trouble. And so it was one of those situations where the people who were there the organizers got in a lot of trouble. The organization I was working for, some people tried to blacklist me there, and it was a moment of realizing that it's really important to be able to speak your truth and also know that like real bravery comes with understanding that often it won't be advantageous to you, but you have to do it anyways.
Cool.
Hi, Evelyn. Thank you for the call. So it has to be, for me, the thing I dedicated the last 10 years of my life to doing, which was helping lead a movement of 6% of our population, 40,000 people from across Vermont, all different backgrounds, business leaders, early childhood educators, parents, legislators, to passing our landmark early care and education bill, Act 76. It's the beauty of it, too, is that it's hard to take on the status quo. It's hard to make systems change. No one thought we could do it. It's sort of an interesting thing. Nobody thought it was possible, and no one had yet delivered it. And it's one of these sacred things, these things we know we need it. We know kids need it, the most critical time of their development. It's going to set them up for a lifetime of success. We know parents need it. We know businesses need workers to be in jobs. And so it's one of these things we know is true. When you see it, you almost have a responsibility to do something about it. And we hadn't figured out how in this country to fix something that was so broken, that was wrong, and we figured out how to do that in the state of Vermont together. And it's working. And again, passing a bill isn't enough. We were on the ground readying the system for investment, putting the people most impacted, like early childhood educators and parents, in the driver's seat. I never once had a leadership team meeting at Let's for Kids without an early childhood educator in the room. We had folks on staff in the room running the meetings, making sure the policy was going to work because they had the lived experience to know it would. And so we readied the system for investment by building the infrastructure. We built pipelines of early childhood educators through education pathways so that when we were ready to take the big swing and finally pass the bill and do the public investment, it would actually work. And it's so gratifying to see it working for families, to see some real economic relief for families, and now to see other people taking it as the example. We de-risked it for other states, for other cities. I was in California before running for governor, teaching them how to do this. They really want to move forward in California for high quality for childcare. Mondani's office, after he was elected, called to say, how'd you all do it? We would like some tips and tricks. Nebraska, Maine, Massachusetts. So it's pretty exciting, again, for fierce little Vermont to be able to be at the threshold of something and lead something that's so critical for systemic change and for our next generation.
Thank you, Ali. Looks like we have another call coming in. Let's go ahead and take that.
We really want to move forward in California for high quality for childcare.
Oh, that's me. I know that voice.
Caller, can you?
I will mute.
Yeah. If you can mute, that'll be great. Really, we can hear ourselves the echo. Could you give us your name and the town you're calling from, as well as the questions you have for the candidates, please? Thank you.
Beverly Kehoe from Stowe. And how are you going to beat Phil Scott?
All right. Thank you so much for that. Amanda, go ahead, please.
Well, we're going to beat Phil Scott by getting out and connecting with Vermonters all across the state. I think one of the really beautiful things about this campaign has been to just see the level of energy and enthusiasm that has been generated. We've already got almost, I think now, over 800 volunteers who are organizing all across the state, going out to events and flyering, knocking on doors. We're pursuing this 252 endorsement strategy, which is rather than just trying to get politically important people's endorsements, really getting one endorsement from every single town in Vermont. So it, from some politicians, but also farmers and small business owners, bankers, or nonprofit executives, whatever. Oh no, they can't endorse. I'm just kidding. No, we can talk about that. But the idea is that so everybody in Vermont really can see themselves as part of this campaign and feel a collective ownership of it. Because I think that in the end is what's going to ultimately not just beat Phil Scott, but lay the foundations for the types of transformation that we need in the years to come.
Thank you. And go ahead, Ali.
Yes. Thanks, Bev. That's the question. That is the question. How are we going to beat Phil Scott? Because we don't have term limits in Vermont, but we do have common sense. And he's been there for 10 years. And if he wins again, he'll be the longest serving governor in the history of Vermont. So I'd say, how do we beat him? With respect. okay? Thank you for your service. A lot of people voted for Phil Scott. If you literally cannot afford to live in Vermont anymore, it is time for a new approach. And everywhere I go on this campaign, I hear that energy, I feel that energy. Vermonters are ready for change. Now is the time. And so, yeah, a people-powered movement, a people-powered campaign. You know, we did it before, we will do it again. And good campaign infrastructure, frankly. You know, we've got canvases happening in all corners of the state. We have an incredible field team that is growing and out there, knocking on doors, getting volunteers, doing, you know, phone calls. This is how we do relational politics in the state of Vermont. You know, everything's about relationships. It is about building a movement, and we will beat him with respect. And again, we have done it once by overriding that veto, and we can do it again. And again, Vermonters are clearly hungry for change. So, you know, I think providing a vehicle for that, you know, to really channel that energy is how we're going to go all the way in November.
Perfect. Thank you, Ali. It looks like we have another call, and let's go ahead and take it. All right, caller, please go ahead and tell us your name and the town you're calling from, plus the question you have for the candidates.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can hear you just fine.
Okay, fantastic. My name is Rachel. I am calling from Colchester, Vermont. My question is just noticing how we're seeing all over the country, people are really rejecting the status quo. Anti-establishment candidates are winning. And I would love to hear how these kind of fit into that definition of the status quo.
Okay.
I missed some of that.
Could you repeat just the last part?
Yeah.
Just how do the candidates fit into that?
Okay, with the status quo.
You want me to go ahead?
Yeah. Thank you. Go ahead.
Great. Thank you for the question. As I understand it, we're seeing folks reject the status quo around this country, and I have to say I am excited for that. I am all in for that. You know, honestly, just because something is a certain way does not mean it is right. And you know, I've really made systems change my work. We went up against the status quo in Vermont by transforming our childcare system. We know it's possible. Okay, we've proved it is possible. So we have to do it again. We cannot let entrenched interests, you know, have their way. We cannot let the most powerful voice in the room always be the one that is most listened to. And so I am here for this notion that we do not need to just be okay with the way things have been, that we have the power and the ability to demand better and deliver better. So I'm about delivering the result, and you know, we gotta be rising up together as Vermonters against the status quo in healthcare, broken healthcare system. You know, in housing, you know, break through the barriers? If we need that housing, why aren't we delivering it? You know, and so in education, thinking about how we are delivering education that's really working for kids, improving, you know, their education outcomes. So, yeah, I am all about it, and I hope we continue to see that here in Vermont, because we've taken on the status quo before, and we definitely have to do it again.
Thank you so much. Amanda, go ahead.
I think a lot of the, I would say, rejection of the status quo right now, at least from my perspective, and again, I'm a bias, I come as an economist, is that it hasn't really mattered if you were a Republican or a Democrat over the last maybe 30, 40 years. They've been following fairly similar economic development philosophy and approaches, where the logic has been like, we just need to, the government takes a hands-off approach to the economy. It just encourages large businesses and investors trying to attract more people, business investment, and Republicans promising that it will all trickle back down, and Democrats promise to take some of that through taxes to fix some of the damages done in the process. But now, obviously, neither of those scenarios have happened, which is how it's possible that we live in the richest country in history, and you know, over 60% of Americans can't even afford basic needs like healthcare and housing and food. And so I think a lot of this frustration with the status quo is rooted in an economic populism and a desire for the government to take a more proactive role in ensuring that we feel secure in our basic needs like healthcare and housing and food. And I think that that is what we learned last time we were here when fascism was around, the New Deal, that was a government transformation about its role not just as a henchman of private sector interests, but really as an underwriter of economic security. And I think that that's what people are yearning for in this moment, to believe that you can have that and democracy, and that it doesn't need to just look like authoritarian nationalism.
Cool. Thank you so much for that. Since we don't have a whole lot of time, I want to ask one question and a lightning round. So I think one question that I think is incredibly important is the criminal justice and public safety here in the state. Vermont has been wrestling with court backlogs, repeat offenders, juvenile justice, and questions about how balanced accountability with rehabilitation is. What do you think is an important unfinished piece of criminal justice reform in Vermont, and how would you use your office as a governor to talk about these issues? We'll start with you, Amanda.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there are a lot of really urgent aspects that we would want to focus on in the state and that we should be focusing on. And one of those is the incredible backlog that exists within our criminal justice system right now. A lot of people are being held actually illegally because we don't have enough judges that are able to process them. And so they're being held. And so we need to increase that capacity to be able to actually process folks that are within the criminal justice system. I think it also means that, you know, a lot of folks right now, there's a gap where we don't have sufficient, I would say, early intervention support of having people have dedicated, let's say, like social workers in some way that can support with mental health care or addiction treatment or housing, employment support, et cetera, because it's really only once you enter into a crime or the criminal justice system that those things end up being provided. And so I think that this is both an issue of how do we ensure that everybody is genuinely safe and secure, that we hold, you know, people who do commit crimes accountable for their actions, but we also make sure that we are always ensuring that this is being done in a way that is about reintegrating people back into our communities to thrive, as opposed to just being punished.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Ali,
Yes.
go ahead. Same question.
Yes, you know, preventing Vermonters from becoming justice involved is absolutely the #1 goal. And there's an array of services that we can, you know, do to support that prevention. And one of them is, you know, we are beginning to roll out in my campaign the details of a free community college for all plan. And I cannot tell you how many of my classmates from Oxbow High School in Bradford, Vermont, I've lost to overdose or suicide or the criminal justice system. And a lot of that is because of lack of economic opportunity and disengagement. And so, and yet we have the lowest number of students going on past high school to any credential, thinking there is no educational or economic opportunity here for them, you know, and yet we have all of these gaps in our workforce. And so, you know, this is a very, very high value, low cost way to change the conversation by saying, this is for you. There is a technical degree waiting for you for free. It is accessible. And when you go through the electrician program, the plumbing program, the mechanics program, the skilled nursing program, you know, you are part of the community. You have a job that's going to pay the bills. And so the prevention piece is huge. But also we have to, I think, finish the promise of our justice reinvestment work. And when folks are leaving the criminal justice system, we're there for them. They have a house. They have services, you know, they are part of the community. That is a really important moment in the trajectory. And we've done some good work there, but we've only just begun. And that's where we show, you know, our abilities as a state and state government when we have folks exiting the criminal justice system and we are supporting them to stay in the community and not go back.
Thank you so much. All right, cool. I think I wish we could have gone through all the questions, but we got a lot of calls, so I think they probably asked all the questions that I was thinking.
All right, great.
Well, that was at least written down.
Yeah.
All right, so thank you for tuning in to the Town Meeting TV ongoing coverage of local candidates, budgets, ballot items. You can find this and many more forums like it on cctv.org/public forum, on Town Meeting TV and YouTube channel. Don't forget to cast your ballot on Town Meeting TV day, or rather, not TV. And on or before August 11th, and then tune in to Town Meeting TV primary results recap show with the following day of August 12th at 4 p.m. Thank you for tuning in and have a wonderful day.